So I'm Steve Corley, and this is my wife Monica, and this is our story.
So Stephen and I have been married as of this year 14 years. When we first met, Steve was already in the military and had been working in the 220th Special Forces Unit for a while. And immediately he went on a deployment to Afghanistan then. And since then, we have gone through 4 combat deployments together throughout our marriage. The last deployment was 21-22, and heading into that deployment, I would say that was the best our marriage had ever been. We had always had ups and downs just like everybody else, but getting to that point where we were in 2021, we were excited about our goals and our plans for when he returned from that deployment.
I agree. I think our marriage had reached a very mature state where you have a very mature love. Kind of like this is settling. This is where we want to be. This is where we're supposed to be, and had really kind of grown into our own prior to that deployment. So in November of 2021, myself and a few other guys had been tasked to go to a location called Gao, Mali, Gao, Mali, in the country. It's a country in Africa. It's a very remote and austere location. At the time, that was a French base, and so we were tasked to provide intelligence for the targeting cycle for the French Special Operations and the French conventional forces that were located there. We had been there, I guess, a couple of months because the injury actually happened in January 22nd of 2022. So a little over 2.5, 3 months, I guess, on the ground. About halfway through the deployment, yeah. And long story short, as anybody would know, if you don't know, a fire base is a very remote, very small location, kind of set up like a prison, if you will, keeping folks in and out, actually. And so you get cabin fever when you're at those locations. So a lot of guys start working out more, they'll start running more. I was one of those guys. So it got to where I'd started running 2 to 3 miles a day and was starting to work up. This was every afternoon. You're going to go out, unwind, and go for these runs. And so this had been going on for several months, and I started shaming a lot of the younger guys, some of the contractors that were there with me, to get out and work out with me. And as it would work out, the first day that I actually got somebody to come and go run with me was the day that we got hit. So to give you the backstory, we've been shelled several times, but never really that close. I think the closest mortar round came within about 400 meters of us. Really, we were living in these Alaskan tents. If you don't know what that is, that's just a soft half-round tent. Sleeps about 10 to 12 guys, and we had divided them up into rooms, probably 5 by 8, 5 by 10 rooms, very small areas, with plywood and sheets and things, just kind of making it the most of it. The closest round at that time had been about 400 meters. Like I said, it knocked a few things off our shells, shook us up a little bit, let us know that we were still in the game, right? However, due to some other circumstances and things and political things and geo things that were happening at that time, on January the 22nd, we all stepped out for this run, and because I'm old, I had to go for about a half-mile walk just to warm up. I got to the backside of the air base, me and the other guys, and said, okay, here we go. I reached down, hit my watch, beep. 3 seconds later, the first round, 120 millimeter mortar shell come in and landed within about 150 yards of us. So we were literally just seconds away from really getting that thing in our lap. The closest thing to us, though, was a motor pool, and the French motor pool, where they had some large up-armored vehicles. So we took off running to try to get to the motor pool. I guess just through an act of God, through luck, whatever you want to call it, we're all right-handed, so we naturally went to the vehicle that was on our right. And thank God that we did. The second round actually came in and hit the vehicle to our left. And so the round impacted I want to say maybe 20 to 25 meters from me. The other two guys were already in front of me. And so there are several different phases of a mortar round for anybody that's ever experienced that. There's the concussion area, then the shrapnel area, and then the fire area. And so I just got caught between the concussion and the shrapnel area. It blew me off my feet, actually blew me into a Connex. And as I came down from the Connex, I remember my thinking that the truck is right there and I'm going to hit the truck. And I remember trying to get my hand between the truck and me. And as I vividly remember, as my hand passed between my face and the truck, the lights went out. So that's when I hit the truck with my head. The next thing I remember was actually waking up, holding on to the ladder that goes up the back of this, large military vehicle. So there's a steel ladder that's literally between my hands. The other two guys had gotten under the truck, and then that's when 16 more rounds of 120 millimeter mortar came in, and they were landing within 200 meters of us at that time. You could see, all the tents going up. You could see the fire. You could hear the screaming. You could hear these things that were happening. So it was very, very, very well coordinated, very direct. You could actually hear the mortar fire as the rounds were coming in. You could actually hear the gun going off. So you knew that more rounds were coming in. We thought there was a lull in the fire. I could actually see, we had an American flag flying at our tent, and I could actually see our tent, and we had 3 more service members that were at the tent, and I was very concerned. We were all very concerned about them because the rounds were literally coming in all around that location. So after the first barrage, I got the 2 guys out and said, hey, we need to get over there and check in and make sure everybody's good. We got to get on the horn and let the battalion headquarters know that we're actually receiving fire, making sure they're tracking this. This is all happening in a matter of seconds. So we take off running, and so the 2 guys that were in front of me basically ran off and left me. And I was thinking to myself, if anybody's ever been in these experiences, you have these silly moments where this is not right. I've been running, for months, and these guys haven't ran a lick, and they're literally leaving me. I remember thinking to myself, I need to start doing wind sprints, because these guys are leaving me. And we'll get to the injuries later that actually caused those guys to actually run off and leave me. As we were trying to run away, or trying to run to our tent, another barrage came in. So they came in with another 6 or 7 more rounds, whatever the case was. We had to hole up in a French bunker, took shelter in a bunker. And that was at that time I realized I'd taken some shrapnel and stuff in my back. I knew I'd hit my face and head. My face was starting to swell, but nothing no more than a good shot to the cheeks. So then, after that was lifted, we got out, took off running again, and same thing. I couldn't keep up. So I was like, man, this is crazy. So we get to the tent. Luckily, our guys none of those guys were wounded. Our tent actually did take shrapnel that actually passed directly through our tents, through our sleeping quarters. If some of those guys were actually in their bunks, they would have gotten hit with shrapnel. These are soft-shelled tents, and it went through there like Grant took Richmond. So we get to the bunker to where our guys are. We get a head count. We call back to the battalion talk, make sure they know everything is good. And by this time, they have dispatched a couple of drones. One of them was an armed Predator to get overhead to try to find the mortar crew that was doing all of this. Unfortunately, they had wounded, when I say they, the ISIS forces had wounded 8 French soldiers, 9 counting myself. One French soldier was actually cut nearly in half by shrapnel directly in front of our tent, probably 45 meters from us, literally, right in front of our front door. Another soldier died 2 days later in Paris, unfortunately. 6 more were wounded. Some of those were females. which is a whole nother story. At the time, I didn't realize my injuries were that bad. At the time, I thought, I just got beat up a little bit, no big deal. Me and the interpreter, we had an interpreter. He was actually out on the run with me. He was Moroccan. He was from Morocco. Great guy. He was actually in the U.S. Army, and after he got out of the Army, became a contractor because he spoke fluent English. He spoke fluent Arabic, and he also spoke fluent French. So the guy was a stud, and he was right where we needed him to be at that time. And I'm also very small French linguist. I actually speak a little French. So he and I ran into the French talk to gather them up, because the French talk had been hit several times with this indirect fire, and they had taken a beating. We brought them into our location to help get the troops outside the wire and to direct the forces once the Predator and the unarmed drone was overhead, to help direct the forces. So this attack happened at about 3:30 in the afternoon. By 6:30 that evening, we were starting to really do some good work, getting troops out, getting them directed, get them on the targets and things. But by that time, I had started feeling the effects of this injury. The shrapnel and stuff in my back, that is what it is. Things happen. I wasn't too much worried about that. But by that time, I had started to get really sick, very nauseated. I could tell there was some other issues going. My neck had started to hurt pretty bad. So we get up to go to me and the linguist go to the French hospital. They have like a kind of like a MASH unit. If you've ever seen the show MASH, I mean, that's pretty much what it was. I think they had facilities to hold 6 soldiers. So the definition of a mass casualty event is if you have more wounded than you can actually treat. So with them only having 6 beds and them having 8 wounded at that location, you can imagine that there was total chaos. So we get down there several hours later. Again, they're working on the kid that passed away a few days later in Paris. They're working on him in one of the rooms. The other French soldier that had died during the attack was covered in a French flag, and there were several more French soldiers, to include these females that were badly wounded, burnt, cut up. You can imagine, 18 rounds of 120 millimeter mortar. That's about a 5.5 inch round coming in. You can imagine the damage. And the gun crew was a very well trained, very professional gun crew, because they put all of these rounds in about a 200 meter football field area. So it was a very, very violent, very coordinated attack. So at that time, they were working on their soldiers, and after seeing what I saw, I was like, well, I've just got a headache and I'm nauseated. I'll be okay. So I actually left. Went back, though, at about 8 o'clock when I couldn't take it anymore. And by that time, we had spoke with the battalion and spoke with the battalion commander, and I had spoke to Sergeant Major Brown about the situation and what was going on out there, and given him the honest assessment of what was happening. When I go back to the hospital, though, they did a CT scan of just my head and my neck, and that's when we found out I had actually dislocated a disc in my neck, and I had cracked an orbital bone in my face. And so they realized, at that point, they knew that we needed to go ahead and get me out. I was not for that, of course, right? Because everybody wants to stay and fight, and I was actually doing my job, and everything was going great. It was an actual great deployment. The things we were doing, the things we were achieving was some amazing things, and I was really kind of bitter or beat up about just having to leave. But the deal I made with the battalion commander at the time was, so Colonel Tice and I have a personal relationship, but at that time, Colonel Tice was my boss. And so he's like, hey man, listen, I'll get you out of there. We'll get you down to Niamey, Niger. We have U.S. doctors down there. We got a facility down there. If they give you the go-ahead, I'll send you right back up there. And so in my mind, I'm thinking, well, that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to pack a 2-day bag, and I'll be back in just a few days. So that's what I did, threw some clothes in a bag. Unfortunately, because of the environment we were in, they couldn't get a flight in until the next day, so it was almost a full 24 hours after the injury that they were able to get me medevaced and get me down to Niamey. However, people need to realize that our area of responsibility was roughly the size of North America. And so when you start looking at the size of Africa, the continent of Africa, it's massive, right? So you can fit like 3 or 4 continents of the world onto the continent of Africa. And our AOR was the size of North America. So just trying to get a flight in there is a feat unto itself, right? So I get down to Niamey, and by that time it has really set in, right? So I have real bad vertigo. I can't walk or see without my head tilted to the side. And at that time, the first time I actually remember being worried. Started having a lot of shortness of breath, and I just kind of equated that to some anxiety. At that time, we realized that I had some other injuries that were going on, some eye damage to my left eye. I'd lost some eyesight in my left eye. And so they went ahead and made the decision to get me to Germany, which is another story. So the C-17 comes in at midnight, and long story short, we get to Germany, and that's where we find out that I had a collapsed lung, among other injuries, which explains why those guys were running off and leaving me. So no amount of wind sprints would have fixed having a collapsed lung. So there was a great list of injuries there.
So when Steve called me in the beginning, it was very important that he be the one to call me to let me know he had been injured, but that he was okay. It was a FaceTime, and that way I could see him and I could hear him and know that he was okay, because he knew I would start to get a lot of phone calls from people on all levels of leadership in the military. And so then everything changed. Once they decided he was sick enough to be medevaced to Germany, then at that point it was like, okay, somebody needs to get me over there. And there just were not a lot of answers to that. There was a lot of time that went by. I sat at home for a week waiting, trying to figure out, who's getting me to Germany, when am I going to Germany, when is my husband going to have to undergo any kind of procedure or anything like that. And it's just, things have been so quiet, so to speak, militarily, for the National Guard and deployments on that kind of level. There just wasn't a plan in place for something of that nature. And so a week later, I get to Marshall, Germany, and I'm at the hospital with Steve and his treatments. And at that point, the decision was, where does Steve go from here? Does Steve need to go to Walter Reed for therapy, or what happens? And Steve, being the warrior at heart that he is, begged to be able to stay on mission in whatever way possible. He was like, yes, I understand, I have a traumatic brain injury, but the operations for managing special ops in Africa was in Germany, and he felt like he could stay on and finish. It was only 3 more months, and so he felt like he could finish the deployment with honor by helping, since he had been on the ground from an office there, and after conferring with medical personnel and respecting his wishes, seeing that he was stable at that point, I supported his decision. I didn't want him to come home and suffer from guilt or anything like that, because that's very common for soldiers. So he stayed in Germany for a couple of months, and while he was in Germany, he started to experience the TBI issues. But we didn't really know exactly what that was at first. We really didn't get much of an education about what to expect if TBI symptoms started to materialize. So we didn't really know what was happening. There were moments of extreme confusion for Steve. am I supposed to be? And so he started experiencing that. He would call and he would talk to me about it. And then it progressed into a lot of anxiety and a lot of PTSD and things of that nature. And so short term, finishing out that deployment, we thought, this is, I guess, to be expected. And when he comes home, everything will be okay. And so when he got home in May of 2022, he was a completely different person. He was not the man I had sent over, and he was very angry. He was very full of rage. He was very bitter because the injury was really affecting his cognitive abilities. And he says many times, I've heard him say, when you break an arm and you can see the injury and you know why it hurts, you know why it doesn't function, that makes sense to you. But for him, he couldn't see his injury. He knew he was walking and talking and he appeared fine and he could work, but there were a lot of things going on behind the scenes that were not working right inside his head that he couldn't explain, and that he felt the need to hide just to be able to keep performing and keep working, because that was extremely important to him, and speaks volumes of his character. And so it wasn't until he got home that we realized just how bad things were, but we didn't really know why they were that way, and we didn't really have a clue who to go to figure that out. It was basically just, well, go to your primary care physician and go from there. And so the depression, the anxiety became very dark very fast, and I literally had to start searching the internet, contacting foundations around the country who are very well known for dealing with traumatic brain injuries, trying to get educated and reading books, trying just to figure out what was going on and trying to help him understand what was going on, because it was taking a very heavy toll on our marriage. The statistics are really outrageous when you start looking at how many marriages are affected and end in divorce when there is a traumatic brain injury involved. I don't remember the exact number when I read it, but it was over 70%, which is something, that there has to be an intervention for that somewhere. So there was a lot of pain and a lot of hard times during that year, and one of the things that made it the hardest was the lack of resources, the lack of knowing who to go to and how to get help.
Education.
The education and the support piece. And it's not that anyone wasn't doing their job. Things are just structured differently when you start talking about full-time Army versus National Guard, and especially when you talk about Special Forces National Guard. And so that really complicated the situation when it came to us figuring out who to reach out to.
So to give a brief history, there are only two National Guard Special Forces groups, the 19th and the 20th group. There are 5 active duty groups. So what that really means is we are constantly being utilized, mobilized, and sent to all corners of the globe, if you will, to conduct missions and to do the things that our active duty brethren do. To use a term loosely, a lot of times we are free chicken, for the active duty, meaning that they can reach out, call upon us. We're not going to turn a mission down. We're always ready to go, and we're never going to turn one down. We're always going to accept it, and we're going to go where we're told, and we're also going to bring a lot of multiple MOSs, multiple skills, if you will, to the area we go in, and we're going to attack that mission with the opportunity to prove ourselves that we are as good as our active duty counterpart. In most cases, we are as good, if not better. the fall there is where I was fortunate, was that I was an active duty National Guard soldier. So you have active guard and reserve. So I was on an active duty status, meaning that my full-time job as a civilian was a soldier just in the National Guard. So it's the best kept secret in the Army. Where the Soldier Fund and where these foundations come in as the education and things is a traditional M-Day soldier. So you take myself being an E8 that was on active duty, while I went to therapy and went to treatment, I was being paid through the Army to go and do that. And that coverage or that insurance that I had actually covered this. Where a traditional Guard soldier does not have that. He has a civilian career on the side. This is not only is he serving his country, it's a part-time job and a paid hobby, if you will. And so when these guys are doing their best and doing the things that they're asked to do, and they're wounded and they're injured, there is no fallback. They're either got to stay home and pay the bills and take care of a family, or they just have to give up something. Every time you say yes to something, you're saying no to something else, and vice versa. So the educational piece there for this is, what do we do, or how do we get to that M-Day soldier? Where are the funding streams to get to that M-Day soldier who is doing this on a part-time basis, who is now broke or injured, trying to get well? That's where I see the largest vacancy in this system is that portion of this.
Yeah, and so the Soldier Fund being created specifically for this purpose. So there are so many organizations out there that target helping veterans, and it's generally veterans across the board. But the language, when you start talking about Special Forces soldiers, is just very different, especially when they're in the National Guard. They're not going to talk about their injuries. They're not going to feel comfortable talking about any mental or emotional strains maybe that they have suffered. And so these are a lot of soldiers who are deploying every couple of years. And so when you think of a Special Forces soldier, you should think they're going to the worst places and they're doing the dirtiest jobs, and therefore they're bringing the worst memories home. But then they don't always have the ability to process that in the way that they need to. And so the Soldier Fund comes in because they can specifically cater to those soldiers and minister to those soldiers on a very personal level. From what we've seen and experienced ourselves, the counseling and, hey, let me get you in touch with this resource, or, oh, you need to go over to this program for therapy. Well, we're going to do some fundraising and help cover your transportation to get there. Right. So had the Soldier Fund existed 2.5 years ago when our journey started, there could have been a very different outcome. I mean, we're very fortunate today that we are where we are, 2.5 years post-injury. There's been a lot of intervention for us with Ben, who runs the Soldier Fund here in the last year or so. A lot of prayer and a lot of hard times that could have been avoided, if we had had more help sooner. So we're truly advocating for the Soldier Fund and the Soldier Fund's ability to target this very special population of soldiers that